Alrighty, so here we go. We're going to start our new boot camp webinar. So I have a couple questions for you. First off, can you imagine that you attend a symphony concert and when they play the next piece of music, they all have to go off on stage and get new instruments because the key changed? Or you walk into a music store to buy a piano and the salesperson asks, "What key piano do you want?" Or you go to a church and the organ can only play hymns in one key. If you want to hear hymns in another key, you have to go to a different church that has them in that key. Of course not, right? That's just not the way music normally works. However, with the NAF, we live with pentatonic handcuffs. And we're attracted to the NAF because it has this open sound, but it has this problem in that it can only play one scale. And then we're all promised that we can make music without any actual music knowledge and without making any mistakes. And obviously this is incorrect because mistakes, for one, are a battle between intention and execution. You know, if you plan to play a note, even in a pentatonic scale, and it's wrong, not the note you intended, that's a mistake to you. Maybe not to anybody else, right? And it's always a good idea to have some musical knowledge if you're playing some music. It doesn't have to necessarily be really intense, but you should have a little bit. So again, imagine if pianos were only sold with the black keys. And this is how you play a pentatonic scale. If you don't play piano, you can just go and play the black keys and you get pentatonic notes. And the manufacturers tell their customers, oh, anybody can be a pianist, just play the black keys. You don't ever make a mistake and you don't have to know anything about music. And that person says, yeah, I'm a concert pianist. I just play the black keys. No, that's the world of the NAF. But we're going to look at a different world today. We're going to look at the things beyond the pentatonic scale. So we're going to get into major and minor and gypsy scales and things like that. So the goal here is to learn notes outside of the minor pentatonic scale. We're going to learn their number tab names, which is also the fingering. So we're going to learn the fingering. And we're going to play some music using these notes. And we're going to talk about some of the different scales these notes can create. And I'm going to try to keep things really not too intense when I describe this. Depending upon your level of comfort with this, you may find that I succeed a little better than others may. Now, why do we want to add these notes? There's a couple reasons. We do it because we want to add color. We just want to do a shift in the tones that we can play, or we actually want to change the scale. Because if we put in some of these notes, they can actually change the scale for us. Now, most musical instruments are made to play all 12 notes in the Western system, and therefore they can play all 24 keys, because there's 12 major and 12 minor scales, so therefore 24 keys. And so you don't need to own several pianos or violins or oboes or whatever to play. One of each will play them all. And the lowest note of these instruments does not say anything about what key they're made in. They just happen to be the lowest note they can play. For example, I studied piano for a long time when I was younger. I don't play anymore. And I don't think I ever played the bottom note for anything, any piece that I ever did. And it would be sort of strange to say, well, the bottom note on a piano was A, so the piano's tuned to A, some scale of A. That's really not the case, right? And also these instruments can play at least one octave of every note. And on the NAF, it's a bigger deal because, ooh, there's a note that we call the octave. But other instruments, no, it's just they're notes, and then sometimes you play octaves of that note. And we'll talk about that too. So the NAF doesn't work this way. It's limited. If you want to play in a different key, you have to buy another NAF. And normally the lowest note on an NAF does match the designated key of the flute. And only a few notes can be played an octave apart, and sometimes not in tune. Now, if we change these fingerings that we're going to talk about over the next 2 weeks, we can change the scale and therefore the key, because key and scale are kind of synonymous with one another in a limited way. Now, similar to the other instruments that we're familiar with, violins, pianos, guitars, etc., when we change the scale, we're going to move the root note of the scale. So the bottom note of the flute will no longer have the function of being the root. It's just the lowest note that it can play. Just like I was saying on a piano, I never thought about what the lowest note on a piano was when I studied piano for years. It was just there. And I played in a bunch of different keys. But on the NAF, we're very fixated. Ooh, this is the lowest note. This is the root note. This is the root of the key, blah, 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 blah. We're going to get away from that. Now, I want to talk about some definitions a little bit here. A scale is a set of notes between two octaves apart. So you have two notes that are an octave apart, and then there's a group of notes in between them. And then common scales have 7, heptatonic, or 5, pentatonic. And scales are constructed from the root note up. And the root note is the bottom note of a scale, not necessarily the instrument, the bottom note of the scale. And the sonic hierarchy of these notes, in other words, the weight that these notes have sonically, brings out a tonal center, which is called the root. So the root note lacks any musical tension. And we're going to look at this, and you're going to actually hear examples of this. So if it doesn't make sense the way I'm describing it now, you'll actually hear it later. And sometimes these are called the fundamental or the tonic. And then I may mention intervals, and an interval is just the distance between two notes. And number tab actually is based on intervals, using the bottom note of the flute as 1, then there's a 2 that we don't play, then 3 and 4, these are the intervals. So the distance between 1 and 5 in my number tab system is actually a fifth. It's just calculated from the root. As we move around, we may change that, but I'll try not to do that. I may also mention a half step. And a half step is the smallest interval between notes. So if you look at a piano and you go from one key to another, including the black keys, just black key, white key, black key, whatever, that's a half step. And again, I'm going to try to not talk about this in any great depth, but I thought I should mention it. And then again, an octave is any two notes that are 12 half steps apart. They're usually the same letter name. So a C up to the next C, that's an octave, or a G to the next G, that's an octave. And as I think I talk about later, I'm not sure if I removed that slide or not, octaves vibrate at what's called a 2-to-1 ratio. So if there's two C's, the higher C is going to be vibrating twice as fast. So if I have an A NAF and I'm playing the bottom, all holes covered on it, it's vibrating at 440. If I play the octave of that note, it's going to be vibrating at 880, twice as fast. All right. Now some more definitions. A key is a set of pitches that establish this tonal center, this root, and then the function of the remaining pitches, how we hear them in play with each other. And there's two types of key, majors and minor, major and minor. And this is true also in pentatonic that we normally work with. And keys are synonymous with scale, so we can use them interchangeably. And then the last one is tonality. And tonality is just a word that talks about this sonic hierarchy, how we hear a total center and how that's working. And so I'm going to be using this word, but if you hear something and it sounds major, you're talking about the tonality, even without maybe knowing that that's the word, okay? And tonality is determined by what we're hearing. So if we're listening to a piece of music and it sounds bright and cheery, it's probably in a major key, a major tonality. And if it sounds moody and dark, it's probably in a minor tonality. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever been improvising? Oh, my mic is way over here. I should have lowered that earlier. Have you ever improvised in what you think is the normal minor pentatonic scale and you realize that your song wants to end on number tab 3? That 3 feels like the center note now, the root, the one that's going to resolve your tune. And this is because you've slipped into another tonality with a different scale and a different root note, which is number tab 3. And that scale is a pentatonic major scale, and it uses the same notes as the minor pentatonic. But the weight of these notes, the sonic hierarchy, shifts the tonality from minor to major, and the minor is on the root note, the bottom note of the flute, and major, the root, is now on 3. So we haven't even added any notes, and we can shift the tonality. And now, to show this, since NAF doesn't use letter names like A, B, C sharp, B flat, whatever, and number tab is organized from the bottom note up, so I can't change it. I need a system to show you about tonality and when we shift the root. And to do this, I'm going to use the do-re system called solfege or solfeggio. Now, you know solfege without knowing it, if you've never heard of it. Most people have, from the song Do, Re, Mi in The Sound of Music. And the syllables are given to the 7 notes of the scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And that's for a major scale. So when I start to move the root around, I'm going to assign do to the root note. Okay? And there'll be others that we'll talk about too, but do is going to be how I'm going to say this note is the root note. All right, so on a pentatonic minor scale, number tab 1 also equals do, because the root of the scale is on the lowest note of the flute. And then we have the syllables going up there, you'll see I have may, not me, because this is a minor scale and solfege changes it. Then fa and sol, and then again, instead of ti-do, we have te-do because for a minor, we changed the T to tape. Don't worry about that. The main thing here is that do equals 1, and then an octave above that, which would be the same note name in regular music, vibrating twice as fast, is on 8, which is another do. Now, when we're playing and we shift the scale to a major pentatonic, do is now on number tab 3. The root of our scale is now on number tab 3. We're perceiving that as the root. And so if I use the solfege underneath it, again, now we have do, re, mi, because we're in a major scale. We don't have fa in this because it's missing. And sol and la, and then no ti, because again, that's missing because it's pentatonic. And then 3, or its octave, 10, is now do, the upper do. And this could go down too, but flutes don't tend to do that. Okay? Now, I'm talking about major and minor, and just in a basic way, major and minor are terms that apply to scales at intervals. We're mostly going to use them in terms of scales. And I'm not going to explain what makes them major and minor, because that gets into real hardcore music theory. But major scales tend to sound bright or happy, open. And minor scales tend to sound dark and moody and sort of a little bit closed off. And that's one of the things that attracts a lot of people to the minor pentatonic or the nav, is that it has this sort of darker, moody, soulful sound. So, and after we get into this, and this may not be until next week, I'm going to have you guys play back and forth between major and minor and compare them and hear them very easily. So if we look at the major pentatonic scale on 3, and I play this, and this is just, I'm not half-holing or anything, I'm just going to use the scale, and I'm going to play between the upper and lower notes. I'm not going to go above 8. That's a major pentatonic scale. Now, I'm not going all the way to 10 because it's kind of high and it gets a little shrill, but 10 would be the upper root, the do, above the top of the scale. Okay. Now, let's look at some songs. So this one's in the Native American Guide. This is called Summer Morning. And this one is a major pentatonic tune. I'm playing in G, by the way, if anybody's interested. Now, because this is in pentatonic, this example that I'm going to give you might be as convincing, not as strongly as convincing as it will be when we get into non-pentatonic notes. But let's say I end this piece, I play the bottom line, and I substitute the last note. Instead of being 3, I'm going to make it 1. Does that seem as pleasant as... I don't think so. And so that's how we can tell that the song has shifted to a different root, because we hear that as being the end of this musical idea. And that's, in many ways, how we identify what the root note of a scale is, by what we hear. And as I said, a lot of you have probably improvised before, and you notice that what you're improvising wants to end on 3. It's because you've just accidentally shifted, or maybe on purpose, intentionally, shifted the tonality of the flute to have a different root note of your song. This is another song that is in the book. This is called The Silent Pueblo. And again, if I was to play, let's say, the last 2 measures and change that last note to 1, it's not going to be as bad as it will be when we start to add non-pentatonic notes, but I still think it sounds a little awkward. It sounds like more wants to happen, right? It doesn't sound like it's over. Now, you'll see here that in this song, all of the notes are played in the pentatonic scale. And in fact, number tab 1, which is replicated in number tab 8, since they're an octave, they're literally the same note. So even if I didn't play a 1, as long as I'm playing an 8, you're hearing that note, one of the 5 notes in the scale. Now, before we start to add new notes, non-pentatonic notes, we need to get comfortable with how things are displayed in the Nakai-Demar's NAF tab system. And to do this, we're going to look at something that we normally can ignore, which is the key signature. Now, a key signature indicates which notes are to be natural, sharp, or flat by default for a piece of music or a large section of the music. And then if we want to change those notes away from the key, we use something called an accidental. And accidentals are valid for one measure, and after the bar line is crossed, any accidental in that previous measure becomes null. And everything goes back to the key signature. Now, the NAF uses a fixed key signature, because it's using it for all flutes regardless of the key, and that's why it's a tab system. It's not describing actual pitches because the key never changes. Now, most music written for the NAF has a key signature 4 sharp. Some people use 3, and I understand why they do. In fact, it makes more sense, but this is the one that's sort of been adopted by the community, the so-called Nakai-Demar system, or what I call NAF tab. Now, 4 sharps is the key of E major or C sharp minor. And Nakai-Demar's acknowledged that, but they said basically it was an F sharp Dorian. And by the way, nowhere do they call it Nakai tab. So when you see somebody printing music and they give, say it's being used by special permission, that's just sort of obsequious pandering in my opinion, because you can't copyright 4 sharps. It just can't happen. Now, the idea of one key for all the NAFs is great. It's a great idea. But the executions with 4 sharps is terrible because it gives us a lot of problems. Things become very counterintuitive, and you're going to see this as we move along. Now, if we look at all the diatonic notes in the NAF key that can be played, so the bottom note 1 all the way up to I'm going to 10, these are what they would look like. Now, I'm including 2 and 6 and 9, even though they're not part of the pentatonic scale, because you can play these notes. They do exist, right? And diatonic means they're in the key, so nothing here has an accidental. Everything is correct to the key signature. And the intervals, major and minor, conform to the key. A number tab also conforms, so that's why I don't show anything here like 4 sharp, 3 sharp, 6 flat, or whatever, because everything is in with the key. But let's look under the hood of this. Now, the sharps, as they are arranged, are assigned to specific notes in the system. So 1 and 8 are sharped because of that first upper left-hand sharp. Then the next one next to it on the right is note 5, so that means note 5 is sharp in the system. And then that top one, that's 3 from the left, that one is applied to 2 and 9 because they're an octave of each other, so it's the same note. And then the last one, which is the one we really don't need, is applied to 6. So these are permanently attached to notes unless they're altered with an accidental. So this is what it looks like if I put the key signature in, but then I put in parentheses the sharps that exist. If you see an accidental in parentheses, that's called the courtesy accidental. That's done in music when you want to remind the player, oh, by the way, this is in the key signature for some reason. And so you can see that what we normally don't realize is that 1, 2, 5, 6, 8, and 9, and then they're octaves below 8 and 1, or 8 and 2, 1 and 2, I'm sorry, have sharps on them because they're in the key signature. So we don't normally need to display them because they're there. And then because they're there, number tab uses this as the default. Now this means that as we start to change these to add non-pentatonic notes, we're going to have to alter them, and the alterations need to conform to the rules of key signatures. Okay. Now most alterations, the one we're going to look at the most, is going to remove one of the sharps, which is why it really doesn't need to be there in the first place. And so it's going to look kind of counterintuitive. Now let's briefly talk about accidentals. And there are 3 main ones. Sharp raises a pitch up a half step. We don't have to worry about that. We're going to have the fingering take care of it for ourselves. But in this case, a C would become C sharp, and then a flat lowers the pitch a half step. In this case, a C becomes C flat, which is kind of an odd thing to display, but I decided to put everything on C. And then a natural removes an accidental that's been put before that note within that measure, or if there's one in the key signature and it wants to remove it from measure only. So let's put aside all this theory and let's look at our first new note, but we're going to kind of use what I just talked about. So the first note I want to look at, I call 6 flat. And the symbol for it is that fourth line from the bottom with a natural sign in front of it, because we are removing the sharp. And by removing the sharp, which is the 6 in the diatonic key presented by NAFTAB, we are flattening that. So I call it 6 flat, because in relation to the key, that's what we're doing to it. So we call that 6 flat. And this note will allow us to make a major scale with a root note on 3. So, and you can see the fingering there. The top 2 holes are covered, then we skip that one, the ring finger, and then we put down the index for the bottom hand. All right? Now, let's play this note a little bit here. I'm going to play this once, and then I'll have you guys play with me. I'm in the key of A. All right, if you have an A flute and you want to play along with me, I'll count to 4 and then we'll play on the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 2, 3, 4. And we're playing the first 5 notes of a major scale on 3, or do, re, mi, fa, sol. Now let's practice this coming down from 7. So let me do it first, and then we'll play together. Okay, now if you're playing an A and you want to play with me, I'll give you a 4 count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again. All right, so we're now, by adding this note, we can play the beginnings of a major scale. Now, let's play this. I'll play it first, then we can play together. And what I'm doing is I'm spreading this out without adding any half holes. I'm not going to do any half holing in this course, by the way, just to warn you. And I'm going to play it starting the root, and I'm going to go all the way up to the top note without going over the 8, and then down to the 1, and then ending on the 3 again. All right. So if you want to play along with me, I will count to 4, and then we'll start after that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me do that for people that have a G flute. So I'll count to 4 again. If you have a G, you can play along. I'll wait for people to pick up their Gs. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. Now, here is a song that we can play in a major key based on 3. It's a fairly simple song, everybody knows it, but because we've added this note now, we can easily play this. I'll play it for you on G. Now again, to talk about tonality, you don't have to hear all of the notes in a scale to hear the tonality of a piece, because the tonality again just describes what the scale may be, major, minor, and what sounds like the root. And if you have enough notes to establish that, you don't need to hear everything. Now, just as a case in point, let me play the last 4 measures of this. And I'm not going to end on 3, I'm going to end on 1. And let's hear how that sounds. Obviously incorrect, right? It's going against the tonality of the piece. So we can tell that the root of this note, the do, has changed to 3. I'll play this again if anybody wants to play along with me in G, and I'll count 4 free, and then we'll play the whole piece. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty simple tune, but I wanted to start off with some stuff that's pretty easy. And here's a very famous piece by Stephen Foster, one of the most famous American composers. And this one starts off mostly in a major pentatonic, because we can see that the song starts and ends on note 3. And for most of the song, we do not see any accidentals. So we're working in a major pentatonic key because nothing has been changed. But we can see very clearly where this changes, and that's where the 6 flat appears, right? So let me play this. I'll switch to A. And just to play this, I'm going to skip the repeat and just go right through. So I could play most of this song without using any non-pentatonic notes except for the 2 notes in what is measure 6 here. All right, I guess let's play this one time. I'll play this in A, and I will play the repeat if you want to play along here. And I'll count this in 4 even though it's listed as being in 2 too. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry about my flub. Hopefully you didn't follow me. Now here's a song in a major scale from the complete guide. This is on page 82. It's called the Highlands. And this sort of has kind of a quasi-Celtic feel. Now again, if I was to play this and end on the bottom note of the flute, what we normally think of as being the root note, I'll start on the second line only. It's clearly not what we expect to hear. We expect to hear the 3. All right. I don't know if people can play along with me, but I'll play this a little bit slower, and I'll continue to play this in A, and if you want to play along with me, you can. This is in 6/8, which we talked about in the last webinar. But just for the sake of those that may not know it, I will actually count the meter instead of 2 pulses per bar. I'll count all 6/8 notes, and then we'll come in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's another piece. I don't know why this happens to be in 6/8 as well, but this is also in the book. This is called Tempus Fugit, or Time Flies. So except for two notes, it's mostly in a major pentatonic scale. And the sixth flat, by the way, is functioning as fa. So if we have do, re, mi, fa, fa is the fourth note of the scale because if we're counting up from 3 now, 3 is the root note. I guess I will try playing this in G if somebody wants to follow along. And I'll give you a 6 count and I'll go a little slower. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, you can see that by adding the 6th flat in, it automatically changes the tonality of the piece and the root. Now, before we move on to look at new notes that play a 3 major scale, it's not a real term. When I think of a major scale built on number tab 3, I call it 3 major for myself. It's not an official term, so don't accept that. We're going to look at some other new notes first. Nadine, what scale is that? Which one are you talking about? We've been playing on what I just called a 3 major. I don't know if that's what you're asking. But again, if anybody has any questions, throw them up in the chat. But I would call that a 3 major, Nadine. It's not an official term, but it's a major scale based on number tab 3. What the real scale will be, by the way, is determined by the flute you're playing and what notes are coming out of the flute. So, for example, if I pick up an A and I am playing something that is based with its root on note 3 in number tab, the flute is playing a C. So I'm actually playing in C major. If I'm playing a G and I'm playing these songs with a root note on number tab 3 is playing B flat on a G flute. So I'm playing in B flat major. And if you're on an F sharp flute, you're going to be playing in A sharp major. You don't need to know this, but since somebody asked, I'm going to talk about that. All right. Let's look at the opposite of 6 flat, which is 6 or 6 courtesy sharp. Okay. So this note has a sharp in the key signature. So number tab doesn't need to have the sharp behind the number because the number tab numbers conform to the key signature. So if it doesn't have a sharp or flat or natural attached to it, in this case it's usually only if I don't use a natural sign, then that means it conforms to the key signature. So the parentheses sharp is a courtesy. Now, adding this note can make a tune sound major with a root note on 4. So I guess we could call this a 4 major scale. And again, that's not an official term. And there's 2 fingering shown here. I like the one on the right the most, but not all flutes can play it. It's not necessarily the one that it's tuned to. So you might want to check your flute. For example, if I play this A and I play the one on the left, which is the top 2 holes closed, and then I switch to the alternate, I'm pretty much in tune. So I can use that freely. Let's try my G here. Oh, wait. That one's not right. So this flute can't play that. So you have to check the alternate to make sure that it's in tune. But I like it a little bit better. It makes it easier to go back and forth to 7. So let's learn the 6 major, the 6 sharp. And we're going to start on 4 this time. And I'm just going to play up. And again, we have do, re, mi, fa, sol. But now we're starting on number tab 4. So let me count 4 and we can all play along. And you can use whichever 6 you want to use. I use the one here because I think, again, it's easier. I should count that in. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Now let's flip it over. I'm going to start on number tab 8, which is functioning as sol, or the 5th note of this scale. Again, I'm in A if anybody wants to play along. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's look at another note, number tab 9, which is an octave above 2. And there's 2 fingerings. Since this is above the octave, I don't know if one of these is actually considered the standard, but I have flutes that use both of these. The one I'm playing right now is going to use the one on the right. And you have to check these by how it plays within the tune that you're playing. So if you play, 4, 5, 6, let's say I play the one on the left. That's wrong. I'm going to play now the one on the right. The first one was a little flat. So you have to hear it in context. You can't just decide, oh, I like this one better. Okay, but you need to check which one your flute actually does. So let's learn this. Let's play just a few notes above and below 9. And if you feel like you need to tone 9 and give it a little bit more gas, sometimes that is needed for notes over the octave. Let's all play that together. I'll do a little slower. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's do that from the other side. I'll play it first, then we can play it together. I'll count in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to put them together. Let me play this for you first. So I'm playing Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La of a scale that's based on 4. So this is, again, what I might call a 4 major, even though, again, I want to stress that's not a real term. That's a term I use. If you want to play with me, I'll count out 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again. And then from the 9 down, so from La to Do, and then back up again. And if you want to play along, I'll count in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So now we're going to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in this new key. We're going to shift everything up 1 note from 3 to 4. But we can do that by adding the sharp 6 and the 9. All right, if you want to play along with me, I'll count out 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as you may have guessed, we can also play O Susanna in this key by using the 9 and the sharp 6. And I'll attempt to play this. Usually after I've played it based on 3 and then I go to play it on 4, I screw it up somehow. And I'll skip the repeat for this. Never fails. So if you want to play it with me, I will count it in 4 rather than in 2. And I'm still in A. 1, 2, 3. Well, there's a pickup. So I'll count 3 and then we'll come in on the pickup on 4. 1, 2, 3. And again, what's causing this note to be in a non-pentatonic is actually the 6 and the 9, because neither one of these are in the minor pentatonic system that the NAF is constructed for. Okay. Now, here's another song that people know really well. I'll go ahead and switch to G for this. And this is my arrangement of it, and there's a note that's missing because I don't do half holds. But let me play this for you. I don't like that fingering. I'm going to play it that way. So my question about this is, does this song start on its root note? Now the answer should be apparent because we've been talking about a specific scale. But again, we need to think about what we hear when we're trying to figure out a piece of music. Like if we're taking something that's already been written down and we want to kind of figure out the scale, even though the music may not say what the scale is outright. Or if you have a piece of music and you want to try to arrange it for the NAF. So when we're thinking about the scale of a tune or song, we need to find the note that sounds like the home note, the root note. And the root note is missing all musical tension. We're going to talk about that in that I'm going to play some stuff and you're going to hear, ooh, it doesn't sound like it's done. And the root note again is do in the do, re, mi system. And it's rarely the lowest note that an instrument can play. Because we've been moving the root around on these scales, it's no longer on the lower note of the instrument. Now, most tunes, especially for solo instruments, which is what we normally play, end on the root because we want that feeling of the release of all musical tension. We want that period at the end of this paragraph that is our song. Okay. So if I take the end of Amazing Grace and I change the last note to the bottom note of the NAF, does that sound like the end of the song? No, because the lowest note of the NAF is not the root note of this tune in this arrangement. And you can hear that. So this is where you can trust your ears like, ooh, doesn't sound right when it ends here. It sounds right when it ends here. So for example, and it sounds over. It sounds like, okay, we're done. So that sounds like our root note. And then we also have a sound that sounds like a major scale as opposed to, let's say, a minor scale. We'll get into that. Don't worry about it. But you can hear there's a difference, right? And what's happening here is 4 is now do in this system. It's a major scale. There's 7 notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, going all the way up to an octave above 4, which we can't even play. That's why I put it in tiny notes. And the same with the 3 sharp and the 2. They're a little bit harder to play. So the root note of this scale, the do, is now on number tab 4. And the 5th note of the scale, sol, can be played above or below the root. That's the note that we normally think of as an octave. Yes, it's still an octave, but this time it's an octave of the 5th note of the scale, and it can be either above or below the root note if the root is in the middle of what we're playing in our tune. So if you look at Amazing Grace, the song starts on a pickup. It's a note usually before the main downbeat, the main full measure. And it starts on the 5th below the root. Dum, ba, and it jumps up to it. Right? And then you'll see all the red notes are the root note, and so then we go below it and then above it with the fifth. And the root note is always in the middle. Now, if we arrange this for the NAF so that the bottom note of the NAF was playing the root, this is what it would look like. And you can see there's a problem here right away. That first note we can't even play. It's beyond the system. It goes below it. And then the sharp 3 and then the 2, we haven't even got to those notes yet. So everything's just a little wacky here. So we have to arrange the tune so that it doesn't conform to what we normally think of as the root of the instrument, but the root of the song. So here's what we have. We got to shift it all up. Hopefully this makes sense. When you're thinking about changing songs, that this will help you. When you find that root note, then it helps you figure out what scale you're going to use, whether it's a 3 major or 4 major, because a lot of songs, as we're going to see as we move on, start with a pickup on the fifth note, the sol, below the root. And you can't play that if the root of the note is a 3 major, because it goes below the system. Here's a piece from the book. Let me play that one more time. All right. So if I ended on that one, there's still musical tension because the way the notes are working, we want to hear it go to. That's our root note. Let's talk about the 10. We're not going to play this really because it's kind of a squeaker. But the 10 is the octave of 3. So therefore it's in the pentatonic minor scale because 3 is in the scale. It's just the octave above it. Now the fingering I have there doesn't really work on most of my instruments. I usually have to half cover the bottom hole, not the bottom hole, but the hole below the ones that are covered here. So the second hole from the bottom. I got to squeak it a little bit. And not all NAFs will play this in any fingering. And a lot of times you have to kind of sneak up to it from below. But I just wanted to present it to you there. So if we wanted to learn this, we could play the 9 in any version that our flute will play. And as you can hear, it's really hard. So I don't recommend it, but you know, I thought I should present it. Some people play it, and some people do it quite well. But it's just there if you want to look at this later. So let's take a review of the notes that we've looked at. We've had the flat 6, and don't forget the sharp 6, the regular 6, the 9, and then the 10. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because if we go back to a major scale on 3, a 3 major, so I can play that full scale from do to do. It's kind of dicey on the top, but it's there. Now let's talk about adding color. So sometimes a note doesn't change the scale, just adds color. And color tones are not permanent. They're not added to the scale. They're just meant to add some color. And they're sort of like a tonal embellishment. And I should say that the note we're going to look at one in a second, is not part of a scale because the spelling of a scale cannot have the same note even if it's a different expression of it. So for example, if I have a C major scale, I can't spell one of the notes as C flat. I have to use a different note. In this case, it would be B. I can't have two versions of C, so I can't have a scale that has an F sharp and an F natural. That's not allowed in spelling scales. So in this case, what I'm going to show you, and I'll explain to this in a little bit more detail, is why this is a color tone and not a scale tone. So that would be 5 flat, the blues note. Okay, so 5 flat is added to the pentatonic minor scale. It does not create a new scale. It is a color tone or note. And we can't add it to the scale because there's already a 5 in the scale. And a scale cannot be spelled with 2 of the same type of note. So flat 5, there's already a regular 5, so this is a color tone, or what's called chromaticism. It adds color, right? And the 5 flat is called the blue note because it's used as a signature note when playing the blues or jazz. Okay, so we get that half step down. And that is a true half step here. If we're going from a 5 down to the 5 flat, that's a half step. All right. Here's a song that's kind of jazzy, and it uses a 5 flat. So it just makes it a little bit jazzy, right? And you'll see here, that's another reason why I'm saying this is a color tone, because we're going back and forth between 5, 5 natural, 5 flat, and then regular 5 again. Let's look at another tune. This is sort of a ragtime song. It's the Roadrunner Rag from the book. And again, I'm using the 5 flat here to create sort of a jazzy sound. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, when in doubt, you don't even have to know. It doesn't even matter. I'm just presenting this because I know this, and it's kind of my thing. So whether or not something is a color tone or not, it's just I've met people that say, well, I know the blues scale. Well, that's really not truly a scale because it disregards one of the rules of building scales. One of the notes has to be a color tone and not a scale because you've got 2 5s. But again, if you don't know that, it's not that big a deal. Just, So in the next session, we're going to look at more notes. We're going to complete major scale on number tab 4, kind of, because we can't play from do to do. And we're going to play songs in exotic scales. Next week is when we get into the real hardcore fun scales. We're going to look at harmonic minor and Spanish gypsy. But I just wanted to get you kind of used to where we're headed before I just really go into the deep end. Okay. Now, in the meantime, I would suggest highly that you review and memorize the fingerings and the notes as they're written in the music so that you recognize, oh, I see that in the music, and this is the fingering, and this is what it's called. 6 flat, regular 6, the sharp version of it that's in the key signature, 9, and then 10's an optional. We're not going to play it, but, if you want to know that, it's there. So, and then the main between these learn to recognize the difference between 6, the regular 6, and 6 flat, both the fingering and the notes, because I find with my students, they get confused. They see that and they're like, ooh, which one is it? 6 flat always has the natural sign in front of it. If it doesn't have that, then it's the regular 6, and then you just got to memorize the fingering for it. Okay. All right, is that it? Yes, that is it. All right, so let me unshare. Okay, so if anybody wants to ask questions, now's the time to do it. And if you want to do it verbally, you can do it now too, just by, I believe, pressing the space bar on your keyboard while you're talking.
Scott, you mentioned earlier that you don't do half holes. Why is that?
I do them at home, but I tend not to do, I never wrote for them. It's interesting, of all my albums, I always pretty much stuck to the pentatonic minor scale because that seemed to be, the shtick for the instrument. But the main reason is that it's unstable because, the flute holes come in different sizes and you get on stage and, you miss it and it sounds awful. Or it's just, so it's basically just, you're kind of doing a tightrope when you do it. It's another reason why I don't play the 10 because depending upon which flute you're playing. Let's say you're used to playing on one flute and that flute waters out during your performance and you got to swap it out for a piece. And suddenly it's off a little bit. It's just a little kind of risky. So and I play other instruments that I can, if I want to play those notes, I can play them on those other instruments. So it's just a personal choice. I play them more than I used to, just for myself. But it's not something that I find works really well and successfully every time you play it. I mean, it's easy enough to make a mistake half the time anyway. So
A lot,
that's just why. It's just a personal preference. Yes, question.
a lot of my music for Celtic music has note number 9 and 10, so I've been forced to play those notes a lot. But it's interesting how the fingering on them change. Um, every book and every instructor has a different fingering for notes 9 and 10, so that's been really challenging for me.
Well, one of the reasons is because the flutes all vary from flute to flute. So, for example, the flat nine, which we'll look at next week, it's always the same. I've never had a flute not play it with the normal fingering. But when you start to get into 9 and 10, the problem is that the flute is not designed to play these notes. So the fact that we get them is sort of a happy accident. And therefore, since the flute's not designed and their flute designs are slightly different, the bore size, the length, whatever. That's what makes the fingering a little wonky. And so if you don't know and you want to know what the maker thinks it is, you could ask the maker. Otherwise, you just try it in the context of the song and see which one works the best. And then that's another reason why on my albums that I performed live on stage, I tended to not use 9. Because depending, I might be playing in the middle of the song and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go from the note. Oh God, which fingering is on this flute? I don't remember. No. And so yeah, I feel your pain. It's a problem. Again, the flute's not designed to play these notes. I wish it was. So next week we're gonna look at all the notes we haven't covered already. We're gonna look at the sharp 7, the flat 9, and a sharp 3, and we're gonna get in some really cool exotic scales. Minors on 4, harmonic minors, double harmonic. We're going to be able to play some gypsy scales. So again, if you can remember and sort of memorize the ones that we've gone over to this point, and maybe even play through the songs that are in the handout, or just reference from the slides the number of the page that's on, and you can go play the full tune, because the ones in the presentation are not the full tune. And just kind of get used to that, so that way when we get to that, you won't have to be second guessing, oh, what was that from last week? And that'll really help a lot. So, alrighty, great. Well, if there's no more questions, I will see you all next week. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.